My guest today is Rachel Good, founder of Discovery Learners Academy that opened in fall 2022 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Rachel worked for more than 8 years as a public school teacher in Washington and Tennessee before launching Discovery Learners Academy as a state recognized pre K to 12 private school with a personalized educational approach. It opened with 21 learners back in 2022 and today has 50 learners, about 15 of whom attend part time as homeschoolers. Uh, about half of the school students are neurodiverse, which is a population that Rachel really caters to, especially as a former special education teacher. Rachel Good, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. It was such a treat to be able to recently see Discovery Learners Academy up close and meet you and see what you've
Thank
built, and
you.
also to see this real emerging education ecosystem, alternative education ecosystem in the greater Chattanooga area. Many of the founders that I spoke with, including you, have launched within the past 18 months. So I really think this sort of microschool momentum and interest in unconventional learning models is continuing to grow, and I would say accelerate too. And I think Chattanooga is sort of exemplifies that growth and that continued momentum. So glad that you're here. I'd love to
Thank you so
start
much.
I'd love to start, Rachel, with your background and kind of what got you interested in education to begin with and kind of started you down the path to first being a public school teacher and later an education entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of teachers. It was sort of just the thing that everyone did. Like my grandmothers were teachers, my aunts were teachers, my mom was a teacher. And so going throughout school, you do career days and what are you gonna be when you grow up? And I was like, anything but a teacher. Like I'm gonna do my own thing. Um, and so I got into high school and I was at a private school that had K-12 and my mom taught at the elementary. And so in lieu of a study hall, they would let you do like a teacher's aide kind of thing. And so I was like, I'll go help in my mom's room, just for fun. And I absolutely fell in love with her struggling kids. So the ones that were the biggest behavior issues or the ones that couldn't read, I just loved them. And I was like, oh man, I guess this is what I'm gonna do. So I tutored all throughout high school. The school I was at the time didn't have a special ed program. So I worked with kids when I was in high school that were in the middle school. That had dyslexia or learning disabilities and needed accommodations. So they would let me go over and read tests, and I tutored them after school and stuff. So that love was there. I went to Vanderbilt and majored in special education there, and sought out the behavior schools and the kind of what the underdogs, right? The kids that everybody was like, no, they can't do it, or they um, won't do it. And so yeah, I went and taught in Seattle for a couple years and came back home and taught over the course of my public school career, kindergarten through eighth grade, in various capacities. So self-contained, kids with emotional behavior disorders. I taught resource, which is like academics, extra academic support, but below grade level. Taught some inclusion, and I ended my career on an intervention team where we were doing academic and behavioral interventions, K-5. Part of that drive kind of to move towards DLA, the whole time I was frustrated that I couldn't give kids what they needed.
Hmm.
There were so many hoops, there were so much paperwork and so many things to follow that didn't always serve kids. But before I had my own kids, I just worked a lot of hours, like so many public school teachers, to compensate because I was going to give the kids what they needed. And then I had to also give the district what they wanted. Um, and once I
And
had my own kids, I wasn't willing to do that.
yeah, I want to get into that in a second, but I'd love to just hear a little bit more about some of those constraints. What were some of the
Yeah.
requirements that prevented you from really being the kind of teacher that you wanted to be?
So a lot of it was standard driven, and the standards are valuable and have a place, but I was teaching in classrooms that had kids who were, well, as it turns out, all kids are this way, but they had different levels in different subjects, right? Like they might have an aptitude in math, but then they really struggled in reading, or vice versa, or whatever might be going on. But they didn't fit that box. And I was required to follow a pacing guide. I was required to follow whatever grade level they were supposed to be in. And, at one point I was working with third graders that didn't know the alphabet. They didn't know their letters of their name. And I was trying to teach them third grade reading standards, and I went to my boss's boss and said, this is absurd. Like, let me teach these children to read instead of
Mm.
trying to teach them, these other skills that they can't do because they don't have the foundational skills. And she said, no, that's not your job, is to teach them the third grade standards. And I said, but they don't have the prerequisite skills. And she was like, well, oh, well, like that's still your job. And that was really hard to palate. Like, I also felt like there was no space for them to have feelings or be humans. They wanted us to move at such a clip, and it was just compliance and regurgitation, because that was the only way to keep up.
Mm.
On top of course, all the special ed paperwork, which was not a small piece.
Yeah. So then you were starting to say that this sort of frustration with the system really began to bubble over when you became a parent. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more
Right.
about that.
Yeah. So I always called them my kids, and I always felt very strongly that, I always advocated for them very strongly. I usually wasn't my administrator's favorite teacher in the building because I was always saying, no, the kids need this. But once I had my own children, I had less extra time to devote to kind of compensating for all the other things. And I started asking the question every parent asks, which is, where is my child going to go to school?
Mm.
Um, and when it was that personal, it was put into really sharp relief. So like I didn't want him in what I was seeing. So I have two young boys, and one of them is very much a people pleaser, and like he wants to get along and he doesn't want anyone to be upset. And I thought, he will give up every bit of himself. He's super curious, he's so funny, but he will just shove all that down to be quiet and like please a teacher and walk in the line and everything. And then my younger son conforms for no one. And I thought, he'll be labeled bad and he'll just get like, and he'll start to believe that about himself. And I don't want that for either of them. So I kept talking about, what if we had an educational option that worked with their development instead of fighting it? What if we could, like, there's this innate curiosity and like ability to learn that humans have. And what if we fostered that instead of crushing it? Um, and what if we let them develop at their own rate? So, that's going to look different in different areas. What if we taught them to think and question us? Like, what if we wanted them to ask those questions? And I guess, did not shut up about it because all my close colleagues, we're having this conversation all the time of like how it could be done, and it's carrying over into home. And then 2020, of course, everything shut down. So then I was home a lot. And in 2020, my husband said, Rachel, are you going to talk about this forever? Or are you going to do it? And I said, that's insane. I don't know how to start a school. And he said, what do you tell your kids? Aim high, fail big, and try again. Like, you'll figure it out. Get in there and like, let's just do it. And so we did.
So you left your teaching job when?
In December of 2021. So in 2020, in the fall of 2020, we started all the paperwork with the IRS and the state and everything. Um, the state from a business end, not from a school end.
Okay.
And we ran camps that next year. And
Okay.
we planned to run camps for a while, but the demand we got from parents in those camps was like, you're going to open in August, right? And I was like, no, we're going to run camps for a while, and then we're going to open a school in a bit. And they were like, no, Rachel, our kids feel accepted here. Like they want to learn. Like they're asking to come. We need you to have a school in August. This was in June of 2021. And I was like, there's no way I can pull off a school in 2 months. But it did get those wheels turning of like, maybe we don't need to wait until 2024 or 2025 to open our doors.
Mm.
Maybe we could do it next year. And so I was working in the school district and also behind the scenes with our board trying to accelerate everything to get us ready. And by December 2021, it just wasn't. I couldn't do both and be a parent and a human.
Yeah. So was that your intent, was to try to create these camps to build demand and sort of experiment, try something small initially, and then the idea was that it would grow, you thought, in several years into a school, but it was accelerated beginning in December 2021, where you left your teaching job and then devoted yourself full time to launching that following August, right?
Exactly. Yes, I had a really wonderful mentor who pointed me in the direction of camps as a way to start
Mm,
to build that business component that I was so new to, and as a way to
mm.
try out all these educational things that I was talking about, but with real kids. Because as we know, no matter how good a model you have, kids, it just doesn't go the way you expect. So to start to get that data and to try things out and to be able to start that iterative process, that's been so essential to our model. So yes, we have him to thank for that. And we thought we would do it for a lot longer, but here we are.
Yeah. And you did the summer camp in the summer of 2021. Then did you do vacation camps too in that 21-22 academic year as well?
So we did summer camps before I ever, even quit my job that summer.
Mm.
And then the next year, which I guess was 2022, um, we did spring break camps and summer camps, and then we launched in August.
And was it, were, your families all set up to attend your school, like those 21 learners that you started with in August of 2022? Did they come, many of them, from those camps?
A lot of them did, yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, I'd say like maybe a core fourth of them came from the camps, maybe a third, and then the rest came from word of mouth, largely from those camps and those families. We did a couple open houses, and so we had some of our 21 starters come from that as well. But I would say definitely it was a big part of it.
I'm curious too, Rachel, about sort of the model. It's pre-K to 12th grade, mixed age, individualized, sort of focused on where each child's at, which is what your vision was. Um,
Yeah.
was that something that also you committed to kind of right out of the gate, that you would create something that had that expanse of ages, or were you thinking something different in the beginning?
Well, yeah, we thought we would start a little smaller. A lot of the micro schools a lot of schools in general start with a smaller block of grades and then build,
Yeah.
which is probably the smarter way to go. But I knew we'd start with pre-K because my oldest was coming up into pre-K, right? And I wanted to be able to bring him with me. Um,
Mhm.
and then I was going to take it through fifth grade and grow our middle and high school as we grew. But I had three families that came to me that I had worked with in some capacity, with their child in the past, that said, this is exactly what our child has needed. We have tried this many schools and we've tried all these different options. And now like, you're building what they need, and they're going to miss it by a couple years because they're going to be too old. And I couldn't say no. So I said, well, all right, if you're willing to be the guinea pigs, we'll just start all the way through, and we'll figure it out together. And that's what we've done.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about sort of the business mechanics of it, because when you launched your summer camp program in 2021, you registered as a camp with the state, and then eventually as a recognized K to 12 private school. So tell us a little bit about that paperwork process.
Yeah, so when we filed with the IRS in 2020, we filed to be a nonprofit, a 501(c)(3), as an educational camp. That's what we planned to be for a while. And so we did that paperwork. We were approved in February of 2021, but of course it's retroactive to the date that you apply if you get that approval. Um, so then we were able to start accepting donations and start writing grants. Um, and then we were running the camps, and of course we were charging tuition for the camps. We started getting our feet wet, learning like what insurance we needed to carry even as a camp, and what paperwork we needed to have for parents, liability paperwork, emergency contact paperwork, all that sort of stuff. um, and in addition, of course, to our programming. And so when in December of 2021, when we decided to really try to open in 2022, I reached out to the Tennessee Department of Ed. There were a couple ladies there that were super, super helpful, and they have a non-public school website, And so I combed through those documents and quickly knew like, okay, we need to be a level 5 school, which is in Tennessee, the least regulated. It's where the state comes in and says, like, yes, they come in and do like an audit. You submit all of this paperwork to them and we submit annual reports to them. But the main piece is that we meet the 180 days requirement, that we meet the number of hours requirement, that we meet the fire code and the health code, and those types of like regulatory things. And then for the most part, they let us teach the way that we see fit, and they let parents kind of be the judge of whether it's working or not. And so we tell our parents all that, like, we're level 5 for a reason, because we don't want that to be run by the state. Like, we want that level of freedom. And so yeah, it was a lot of paperwork. Because I wasn't working full time though, and because they were really really helpful in answering questions for me, and no, this is not at all what we were asking you. We figured it out.
Great. So what were some of the other, or were there other sort of startup challenges, particularly going from kind of December 2021 when you left teaching to then launching in August 2022? Any hiccups that you encountered, or was it sort of smooth sailing to start?
Oh no, lots of hiccups. Of course. So, funding was a huge one. Where do you find funding? We don't have anything to show for this right now, right? It's this big dream, but we don't have any real data to show you that it works. And so many grants want a lot of
Mm,
data, and rightly so. Um, Also, because we weren't charging tuition, we weren't eligible for a lot of funding since it wasn't completely free. And then because we didn't have anything that was considered a minority group, so we have a lot of kids who are neurodiverse, but that's not usually counted. And we weren't only serving kids who are neurodiverse. And a lot of our families are middle class. We didn't have the money for a scholarship fund to have kids who couldn't afford a tuition. So our tuition is uh, under half the average tuition in Chattanooga, because we wanted to be affordable to as many people as possible and still pay the rent and pay our team. But anyway, so finding that niche of like, and we're in the South and we aren't religious. It's not a religious school. So that cut out a lot of funding. So just finding the people that wanted to fund this kind of a program, extremely time intensive. And it's certainly not my skill set. I mean, I was a kid that didn't even sell like wrapping paper in elementary school. I was like, those toys aren't worth it. Like, I'm not asking people to buy
And
this.
and
So
sorry to interrupt, Rachel, but this
yeah.
was funding that you needed to launch, basically to pay rent, or like how was it different than whatever startup costs you had with the camp, right? What was
Okay.
the
So
kind of
yeah, so camp startup costs were extremely low. We did rent space, but we were just renting it by the hour. And we
mm,
had a couple places that were just really generous and worked with us, believed in what we were trying to do, and gave us really, really good rates. So our camp fees covered that.
mm,
Um, Insurance to run those camps was really low
mm,
compared to what we have to pay for a school insurance, because we didn't have swimming or any of the things that make camp insurance go sky high.
yeah,
And I had a large body of volunteers that helped run camp. So like, I didn't pay myself. We paid a couple of people to help with camp an hourly rate, but I had a lot of teachers that just volunteered their time for free. So, and then I just personally bought materials. Um, so it was all kind of just this like grassroots
yeah,
model. And then suddenly I needed $300,000 because I needed to pay a team of people, and I was paying $36,000 a year, and 36,000 a year, and yeah, something somewhere around there for rent, which truly was like a godsend compared to a lot of the other options. But still, it wasn't it wasn't money I could just write out of my checkbook.
yeah,
Um, and the insurance is so much higher when you're running a school. So we were paying like $6,000 just insurance for the year.
mm,
um and then we thrifted a lot, and we got really creative, but we needed furniture and we needed supplies and computers, and so we definitely kept expenses down, but yeah, it was a lot of startup money. And
yeah. So
tuition
did you?
helped offset that, but
Okay,
it
yeah, that's what I was
didn't.
gonna say. So you got some grants, and then you had tuition.
Yeah, so we started just getting private donors. We had a
Mm.
couple private donors who came on board and said, yes, we're willing to take a chance on you. And I mean, we wouldn't be here without them.
Mm.
And then we had the tuition coming in, and that helped pay our staff, our team. And Vela was the first organization that we got a grant from. So again, it's very hard to get your first grant. They all want to know where else you've gotten grants from as like
Mm.
evidence that you're like gonna manage it well and stuff. But you have to start somewhere. And I just did regular Google searches for groups that would do grants to this kind of a program and ran across Vela Ed Fund and got their micro grant. And then I mean, that just opened up a whole world for us. I mean, the $10,000 was hugely helpful. It made payroll last January, but it also they connected us to so many other people and funders and just other people doing what we're doing. And it was the start of heading down the hill with the snowball, which is kind of how we've seen funding for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and I just want to
Um,
reinforce too that your tuition is $7,000 a year, which is about half the
mhm.
cost of most traditional private schools in your area and less than the $10,850 a year that the local Hamilton County Public Schools spend per student. So you're a low cost private option that's still financially out of reach for many families, but is more affordable than most private options for some families.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and so I'd love to talk about just a little bit more on your startup because I know one of the things that you did was just exhibit such tenacity in trying to find a location, which was another one of those sort of startup
another big
headaches.
hurdle. Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So where are you going to be? I A lot of micro schools start in homes, which is admirable and one way to go, but it wasn't ideal for several reasons for us. So we were looking at other options, and commercial leases are unforgiving. You have to sign away your life in like 3 years to commit to this 3 year lease. And at that point, we had my one child because my youngest wasn't old enough yet for pre-K. So that wasn't going to pay the bills, and I didn't want to sign my entire like life away in case what if it didn't take off. um and so the other problem with commercial real estate spaces that were possibly in our price range was there was no play space, there's no green space. How do we get outside? And we ran into that with camps. We had super active camps, but still the kids missed being outside. Like there's just something about the grass under your feet and the sun. And so that was hard with commercial spaces. And so we started looking at churches, even though we're not religious, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But right after 2020, we're in the Bible Belt, there's churches everywhere, and a lot of them had members that were having to go completely virtual, and they suddenly had these massive buildings that were empty. And so we identified kind of a radius of like close enough to downtown Chattanooga to be central enough, because there's a lot of suburbs around Chattanooga. We wanted to be able to access most of those different families um, without being right downtown because we knew that real estate was out of our budget. Um, and so I just did a Google search for every church in that radius. And I went through Google Maps, and it was at least 30. It was probably more than 30, but and I emailed every one of those pastors or receptionists or whoever I could find a number for, an email address for, or I called some of them and just said, hey, here's who we are. Here's what we're doing. We're not religious. We're not anti-religious. We're just neutral. But we really think this is important for our community. Would you be willing to talk to us about renting your space? And I had two to get back to me.
2 out of 30.
Yeah. And so we toured both spaces, and the place where we are now is a Methodist church, and it it has just been amazing. They had an old Sunday school wing that they weren't using anymore, and so we were able to like put in security doors and kind of lock our wing down to meet fire code and safety regulations. And they gave us access to this massive garden that they didn't have time to upkeep, so now our kids get to work in the garden. And then they have a beautiful gym that they let us use, and they already had a playground, so it was really just um perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you launched in August of 2022 with your 21 students. Did you intend out of the gate to have half of your population be neurodiverse? Was that part of the initial plan?
No, we weren't opposed, but I really hadn't thought of it either. The initial part of the model was we just want to let kids be kids. And we believe that they can learn and that they're already wired to learn if we get out of the way. And if we set up opportunities for them to learn. And we wanted to have expectations, we wanted to have guidelines. It wasn't intended to be a free for all, but it was really intended to be a much more organic, much more collaborative community of learners where we could actually just do life together and we could learn to regulate feelings and learn to feel hard feelings alongside learning the alphabet and how to read and how to write and do math and all that kind of stuff. And of course, embedded in all these rich science and social studies projects. And what we found in our camps and in our open houses was that a lot of these families, most of them came to us because traditional school wasn't working, right? If traditional school's working, you're probably not looking for something else. We had a couple families who were just like, our kids are thriving in traditional school, but this so aligns with our values and came over on a board. But most of the families, it was like, my kid feels completely unheard. My kid's crying every day. Or my kid feels like they're stupid, or is bored. And so for whatever reason, they didn't fit that mold. And we found as we kept going that a lot of those kids were neurodivergent. And of course, neurodivergence is very broad. So that encompasses ADHD, that encompasses giftedness, that encompasses LD, that encompasses autism. And so we certainly found that there were kids that had needs that we didn't have the resources to support. And as a special ed teacher and a mom, that broke my heart. And I really wanted to serve everyone. But we quickly learned that we couldn't effectively serve everyone and that we weren't helping anybody out by trying to serve someone we couldn't serve. So we had to really zero in and identify, which pieces of our model um, were essential to come with and which pieces could we teach, right? Because there's a lot of independence in our model, but 5-year-olds are not super independent. um, and so we teach independence, but then what pieces do they have to already have in order for this model to work for them? And it's been a learning curve, but we love the diversity that it's also built for all of our learners, just seeing the different perspectives. And, we do number talks and the way some of them solve math problems. This blows my mind. I mean, I've done college math, but the way that they think is just so different, and it's equally effective. It's just a cool way to see the world.
And you also have a lot of sort of sensory materials in the school and really tactile, manipulatives. Tell us about that, how that works.
Yeah, again, it's known in the SPED community, right? The special ed community, but because so many kids need some kind of sensory in order to regulate their body. So
Mhm.
whether they need a squeeze machine that helps, like, it squeezes them when they crawl through it, or they want to sit and spin so that they can get that motion, or we have like water tiles that kids can push on to get that kind of piece, or trampolines to jump on, or whatever that might be.
Mhm.
But also, I've never met a kid that didn't benefit from these times. In fact, our team
Right.
sometimes use them. It's not specific to kids. Like, humans are sensory beings, and sometimes to regulate or to process, it's just helpful to have a place where you can move freely or where you can go. We have a wall with like different textures you can touch. Or but how many people pet an animal when they're stressed, right? Or how many people go take a coffee break or a water break or whatever, go sit in their car for a few minutes and listen to music when they need to regulate? Why don't we give that to kids?
Yeah.
They need
Yeah.
it just as much, if not more.
Yeah. So you have this sort of full-time private school model, but then you also are open to homeschoolers. I wonder if you can tell us about that population, what attracts them to your school, and why did you decide to open it up to homeschoolers as well?
So we did not have homeschool the first year. We just took on the full time. We were anticipating having about 8 kids, and then we ended up with 21, which was such a great problem to have, but definitely kept us on our toes. Plus, it was just first year, so much learning. But near the end of first year, I had a mom reach out to me and just via email and said, "Hey, I've seen your website. We really love what you're doing. For our family, homeschool is really important for financial reasons. Like we can't do a full-time school, but we so wish that our child could be a part of this in some capacity because there's so much homeschool community in Chattanooga and it's so um, predominantly religious. So since we're not religious, it's very hard for us to find places to kind of plug in. Would you be willing to offer a homeschool option?" And I said, I don't know. I mean, I hadn't thought about it really. But like that's an interesting concept. Like give me a few weeks and I'll message you back. And she said, "Okay, great. Thanks for taking my email." And so we got on a couple video calls and I said, "What would you want and what would you need from this?" Um and I said, "You know what? Our secondary is really small. So our middle and high school cohort was those 3 kids that I told you about. And an important part of being that age is the social piece.
Mm.
So I thought, well, that's going to be our slowest growing bit though, because middle schoolers and high schoolers don't want to leave their friends from whatever they're already in. What if we brought in high schoolers and middle schoolers that are homeschooled and then they would our full-timers have more peers, those kids get access to some of the stuff that we have that their parents don't have or can't offer them. Maybe it would be a win-win." And so we built our program out from there, and as it turns out we ended up doing homeschool all the ages because the middle and high schoolers had siblings or friends or cousins who were like, "Wait, you're doing this, we want to do this." And again, we can't say yes all the time, but we've really learned that a lot of times being open to things we didn't expect or didn't necessarily think we were going to work has really been a gift in this process and worked out very well for us. So we try to be open to possibilities.
So great. So how often do the homeschoolers come?
So we have A and B homeschoolers. So our A homeschoolers come Monday, Wednesday, and our B homeschoolers come Tuesday, Thursday.
Mm.
So Friday is just our full timers,
Yeah.
but we have homeschoolers the rest of the week, and they're full day. They do everything we do in those days. We just adapt assignments and projects that are long term down to, the time that they're here.
So, Rachel, what you've created at Discovery Learners Academy, was that what you had dreamed about, the way education could and should be?
Yes and no. It's a lot different than I thought it would look. But it's also been way more than I thought it could be too. So, it's really fun. My 6-year-old comes home all the time. He's like, "Mom, I didn't learn anything today." And then he's over here like, "Well, if I just had 5 more, I'd have 20." And I'm like, "You're right, you're adding within 20, you're fine." Or we're in the car and he and my 4-year-old who's now in pre-K here are sounding words out and they're like, "We just played all day." And I love that they're so immersed in it. They want to come to school. Like they beg to come in the summer. Like, "Mom, go work at school so we can go back." And we have other kids that feel that way too. Like lots of our kids don't want to leave and they have good home lives. It's not that they don't want
Yeah.
to go home, but we love that we've created an environment. So I think in that sense, yes, like the essence of it, we've really gotten there and that community has been really powerful, but the ins and outs of how it works just blows my mind every day. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I who would have thought?" It's way bigger than I ever could have done when I was sitting at my kitchen table in January 2021 trying to map everything out.
Yeah. And you have 50 students now. How many teachers and staff?
So we have about 6 mentors, full-time mentors, which is what we call our teachers. And then I sometimes I teach. I do a lot of student support, like learner support rather, where I meet with kids as they're struggling or, walk through things with them, do a lot of our mentor training. And I was also running all of our administrative side, but in this January we hired an administrative director, which has been amazing.
Amazing. So about 8 adults and then the 50 kids. And you're pretty much at capacity. I wonder, what you're thinking about for growth plans.
Yeah, so this coming year, we're only going to have spots for 60. So we're not going to grow hugely this year. We're splitting our secondary into middle and high school next year. But beyond that, we're kind of staying where we are. And yes, we're going to fill this hallway in the next year or two. We're going to run out of space here. And we knew that would happen eventually, but we have time to plan for a building. And my big dream is that we find a big building and get it up to educational occupancy code for the fire marshal, and then bring a bunch of micro schools and co-ops and stuff that are popping up, like you said, in Chattanooga, into that building so we can share a gym and a library and some of those resources, and give families a way, like, not every kid in a family fits at one particular school. The beauty of micro schools is that you can find the right fit for your child, and they don't all have to go into one size fits all model. So if we could have wings and hallways or whatever of different schools, then one stop shop, but you can drop your kids off at all the places that are right for them.
Oh,
So
I
we'll
love
see,
that
but that's
vision.
what we're working towards.
Yeah. And I know when we talked, when I visited in person, you were saying that sometimes families will approach you and ask if you participate in Tennessee's small school choice program that allows students in certain sort of underperforming areas of the state to be able to have a portion of state allocated funding to use at a micro school or a private school. And you are not a participant in that. And you were saying to me that it sort of breaks your heart when you have to say, no, no, we're not participating. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Tennessee has an ESA program, and the rules keep changing with it. I think it's going to grow, but right now you have to be a level 3 or a level 1 school to be eligible. So Tennessee has those 5 levels of private schools. And level 1 is much more highly regulated by the state. And we don't want to spend our time documenting what we're doing is working. We have plenty of internal data. We do a nationally normed test every year. Like, we know it's working. Our parents see that it's working. Our kids are happy. They're growing. So we're confident, but I don't want to spend all of my time documenting it. I don't want my mentors to do that. I want them spending time building relationships and interacting in meaningful and impactful ways with these kids. And so yeah, right now we don't accept it. We've looked at it, and we may consider in the future possibly jumping through some hoops to make it more accessible. But right now we're really just actively seeking um, funding for a scholarship fund so that families that want it,
Mm,
excuse me, will have access to it without us trying to go back to I was in the system. I taught in
yeah.
that system, and those restraints were soul crushing. And so I don't want that. Um,
But if those restraints were taken away, you would be, eager to
Yes. I mean,
participate.
it's the saddest conversation that I have when I sit with a parent who says, my child would thrive here. This is what my child needs, and I can't afford it. And I work with them as much as I can. It's like, if we have any hourly positions open, any of our janitorial or like aftercare or anything that we can, like, that they're a good fit for, can we plug you in there? Can we spread your tuition out over 12 months instead of 10? And,
Mm,
we'll do whatever we can. But right now we just don't have a financial base to supplement the tuition as much as some of these families need. But it breaks my heart because I opened the school to help kids. We're not making any money here.
right, right. So, Rachel, as we begin to wrap up, what is your sense of the future of microschools and alternative education models in Chattanooga? What are you seeing on the ground and helping to cultivate? And maybe how does that fit into what you see nationally, sort of the push towards these unconventional learning models?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be a micro school. It is growing. I think COVID really accelerated parents and families' eyes being open to the fact that there were other ways to do this, and to some of the problems in the traditional model. I don't think that it'll ever be the only thing. But the beauty of like I said, the beauty of micro schools is having that option, and the fact that each of us does kind of have a niche of like how we serve kids and what we do and who we serve well. So the more the better for our community. Also, we're all small by design, right? So that we can know every child. And so no one of us is ever going to be able to meet the need in this community. So in Chattanooga, when we started 2 years ago now, there was a handful of forest schools, some really cool forest programs here in Chattanooga, and most of them are lower elementary. Um, and then we have a Montessori school and a lot of traditional private schools, but that was kind of it for non-traditional, beyond homeschooling, of course. And so we are collaborating with and working on building relationships with those groups. But we're also excited to be seeing some new micro schools pop up. So Triumph Academy opened this year in Cleveland, Tennessee. They're an Acton Academy, and they're amazing. Walker Academy is working on opening here, hopefully next year, or maybe in 2 years. And so as we see those popping up, Elevate Academy opened this year as a co-op. We're super excited. And so my team and I said, how do we make this a community? All of us are asking these same questions, the questions you're asking, right? What does the paperwork look like? How do you figure it out? Where do you get insurance? Where do you find a building?
Mhm.
Um, what do you do for when this happens? Like, why are we all feel like an island, right? You're all scrambling as founders and leaders of these schools. Like, it's extremely time consuming and emotionally taxing. It's rewarding also. But why do we all have to feel like islands? What if we came together and shared resources and were a source of support for each other and collaborated in certain ways? And so we're a member of the National Microschooling Center, and that has been such a great community, and the Vela community has been so helpful to us. So I went to a national microschooling retreat during School Choice Week this year, and was just struck by like how impactful the community is. And I was talking to leaders from all over the country and about their local community and their like cohort of non-traditional schools in their community, and I was like, we don't have that, we need that. And so we made it. And so we created Chat Innovate Ed, and it's just a
Mhm.
group of innovative education leaders and people who think they might want to start one. We're like, come on, we'll show you everything we know. Like, learn from our mistakes. We need more of you. We don't see ourselves as competitors. We really see ourselves like as a team and as meeting different needs. And it's such a gift when you do have a parent, because in addition to financial needs, we sit with parents who are like, I want my kid to go here. And I'm like, I love your child and I value them and I can't serve them well. And they're like, but you aren't mean to them, but you will love them. Like, and yes, I will. And still it's not the right fit. But that's awful because they've been in a system that doesn't always love them or treat them well. And so to have other partners and other schools in the community that I know of that I can say, hey, we don't have the resources or we're not the right niche, but go check out this school or go talk to these people is such a gift. And so we really see each other as a resource and as allies.
It is such a gift, and it really will, I think, help to catalyze education entrepreneurship and all of these unconventional models in Chattanooga. It's just that community and that connection and encouragement, inspiration locally that I think is just immeasurable in terms of its positive impact. So
I
kudos to
think it's growing
you.
and I think we're here to stay. So it's I think it'll continue to be a bigger portion of the sector. You ask nationally, the National Microschooling Center says that right now microschools make up about 2% of the schools, or we serve about 2% of students in the US, and they project that we'll hit 10 to 20% of the market share at the top there. But
Amazing.
in the next decade or two, not tomorrow. But we think in Chattanooga, we have a deep need for more. And we think it's going to continue to grow. And we see charter schools coming up. And so options, lots of options is what we want. And we just want to be a part of that community so that families can get what they need.
Incredible. So, Rachel, what is the best way for my listeners and viewers to find out more about Discovery Learners Academy and follow your work?
We just launched our new website. It's dlachat.org. That has a lot of our information. And then we are on Instagram and Facebook as DLA Chat as well. So you can see all of our fun kids and some of the cool stuff we get to do.
Well, best wishes for your future success in serving these learners and creating individualized education options for families in Chattanooga. Rachel Good, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for having me.